Hello and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. Today's review is Control Group for Delta Green, the role-playing game by Arcadia Publishing. In this video I'll be reviewing the fourth and final scenario in the book, Wormwood Arena. The first thing we are greeted with is the date, August the 5th, 2013, and a quote from Milton's Paradise Lost, and then we move on to the scenario itself. We learn the story of NSA intelligence analyst Francisco Sellers, a person associated with the programme, who, while conducting a review of images of potential unnatural danger 2 months ago, came upon a candidate from a pamphlet that had been photographed and emailed from a cell phone that advertised a self-help group, Harmonic Bliss. The image was sent for further review. Harmonic Bliss is a New Age-style sect created in 1992 by a man called Armstrong Knox. Knox died 8 years ago and his daughter Estelle has taken over. They have no website or email and only advertise on paper. A bit of research will see them mentioned a couple of times online, with some saying it helped them and others saying that it didn't. Estelle lives on a farm around 30 minutes from Leavenworth, Kansas, just northwest of Kansas City, and it is owned by Harmonic Bliss members James and Stacey Galsworthy. Around 6 months ago, the Galsworthys vanished. Their disappearance was reported to the police by friends and family, and nothing has been done by them since. No credit card usage, phone calls, banking or social media. They have disappeared entirely. When questioned, Estelle claims that they have gone on a long vacation and asked her to look after the farm. Police investigated and found nothing untoward. The case went cold and more Harmonic Bliss devotees are now staying there. Delta Green initiated Operation Wormwood Arena to look into them and this potentially unnatural sigil. We then have a box out called Survivors and Recruits. The aim of this scenario is to unite survivors of the previous missions, Blacksat, Night Visions and or Sick Again, as a team to tackle this final one, and it goes into how they will have been completely briefed on how important the work they do is, and to think like the criminals they have now become, making the assumption that it is the programme that has taken them on board, but it also gives instructions on how they can be cowboys. We have a simple map of the local area, and that leads into the next section called A Kidnapping. The mission is supervised by a long-time FBI special agent called Odette Jackson, who is also a Delta Green veteran who works in Kansas City overseeing operations there. She has managed to persuade the special agent in charge of the area to assert federal jurisdiction of the Galsworthy case as a potential multiple kidnapping, as it has become more suspicious as time has gone by, with the potential for finding evidence diminishing every day. If some sort of resolution is not found soon, Jackson's career could be on the cards. Sellers, the agent who noticed the symbol, is to help Jackson. They have actually worked together before. The programme arranged for him to be detached to the FBI as a temporary assignment, and over the following days they performed a preliminary investigation. The player's agents have been tasked with infiltrating Harmonic Bliss to see if they are dangerous, at the usual core objectives: identify, neutralise and conceal any unnatural threat. They're also tasked with inventing evidence to close the Galsworthy case for the FBI, sufficiently believable that the US Attorney's Office would be able to arrest or present evidence that they were acting alone, have been identified and are deceased, to else determine that no crime was committed. What the symbol means is on a need-to-know basis, and as usual, the agents don't need to know. After this we move on to the next section, the Team Convenes. The agents are gathered by Jackson in a cheap hotel room, where she explains everything that is known so far, and introduces them to Francisco Sellers, using aliases if the players prefer. She points out that if something untoward did happen to the Galsworthys, then the agents may be their only hope of finding them and saving them. She will give them a copy of the pamphlet. This is a handout later on in the chapter, and mentions that the landline links to the Galsworthy farm, so it must be recent. Sellers will point out that it was the glyph that caught his attention. The investigations already performed found a man on the inside, Don Hocking. He's been with Harmonic Bliss for years, since the days of Armstrong Knox, and he recruited the Galsworthys. He is suspicious of their daughter. Around 4 years ago, Estelle started receiving visions. This was never something that was part of what Harmonic Bliss did back in the day. The Galsworthys grew closer to Estelle, and 8 months ago she was invited to live at the farm. 2 months following this, Estelle claimed that the three of them went away, leaving her in charge of their home, and over time more Harmonic Bliss devotees have moved in. Hocking is ready to do the same, but will take a few undercover FBI agents with him as new students. He is more than willing to tell them all about Harmonic Bliss, and Jackson will provide them with a transcript of an interview with Don. He can tell the agents all about the Harmonic Bliss dogma. The plan is to have a short undercover operation at the farm where Estelle is living with a group of devotees, with the idea that one or two of the agents will go undercover to find out if anything unnatural is at play, gather further evidence for the FBI, and determine if any of the Galworthies are alive. The agents will need to gain Estelle's trust, and as such, Jackson must select the most personable agents to do the job. Skills like forensics, disguise, and the like are just added bonuses. The players should be asked to invent fake identities, and credentials will be supplied by the program, though they will not stand up to close investigation. They will be given time to practice their new personas. Should the agents come up with a better idea, Jackson listens and can be talked out of the plan in such a case. Jackson puts Sellers in charge of monitoring communications with the undercover agents, and he will be parked in a van a few kilometres away, though an agent who is a better fit could easily do the job. So now we get on to what Hawking can tell them about Harmonic Bliss. To join Harmonic Bliss, a potential new member must sign up to have an Omega reading. These are usually given by Estelle, who uses a device called an Omega Reader that her father designed to determine the seeker's harmony with the music of the cosmos. This is followed by weekly attunement sessions and something called body instrumentation practice, essentially massage and group hugging, after which members go away and perform pre-verbal meditation. Lastly, they have a group discussion on their lives and how Harmonic Bliss can aid them. A second Omega reading is done around 12 months later, followed by a ritual bath. This usually gives a calmer reading than the first, thus proving that the practices are working. They teach devotees to be compassionate, understanding and compliant. Singing, playing music and enjoying nature are encouraged, as well as doing anything Estelle Knox wants. Fighting, arguing and the like are discouraged, as well as listening to too much recorded music. Isolating members from the outside world is a new thing that started around 5 months ago when Estelle encouraged members to live at the farm with her. Currently 6 live there. Those agents with skill in occult and psychotherapy can recognise some cult techniques at work. Sellers can inform them of this, and the method of affectionate instrumentation is a known cult tactic called love bombing to make people feel welcome. Hawking describes Estelle Knox as dedicated to her father's principles, energetic, well organised and confident, being more assertive than Armstrong. Her father wanted people to get along, whereas Estelle wants people to do as they are told. Should Estelle's health be questioned, Hawking can tell him that she has some strange symptoms, occasionally being gripped by muscle seizures along her limbs that she perceives as signs from her father and a hint of the pulse of the universe. Any agent with a medicine of 60% or more suspects a possible thyroid condition. Hawking became suspicious after the Galworthies disappeared. He spoke to the police but nothing came of it. The Galworthies had a flaky reputation as it stood and had been talking about going on a trip. Their daughter Meredith had been homeschooled since being bullied in school from the age of 13 and had a stutter on top of being deeply shy. She had no close friends and avoided social media. Estelle was known as a close friend and had an ironclad assertion that they had gone away and that she was to look after the farm. Hawking thought that she must have been overreacting and was thinking of moving to the farm until the FBI told him that it was worth investigating and he was eager to help. After this, we move on to a section called Secret History. Here we find out that a visit by Estelle Knox to an abandoned town around 260 kilometres away called Arcadia Junction caused her to find what she thought was a huge, strange statue, but was actually on a natural creature called Corgrim Carl, a thing that is in a dormant, stone-like state. It mentions how the Narcotic manuscript mentions beings like this that fed on humans and turned to stone when starved. This particular entity survives on mammal blood and a solvent that is added to gasoline and turpentine called methylterbutylene or MTBE. When fully energised by these substances, Corgrim Carl can emit spores. If they enter the eyes of a mammal, then it can see and hear what they do, and if enough of the spores gather together, then they can become mini chemical factories that produce substances that can influence human behaviour, allowing Corgrim Carl to change their mood and physical reactions, as well as allowing telepathic orders to be sent to them anywhere on Earth. Luckily, its ability to spread spores is limited. The entity also uses a spell that Estelle calls the Glyph of Harmony, that when combined with the spores allows Corgrim Carl to mess with the brain of the infected. The glyph is the one on the front of the brochure and is listed as the Aventurus sign in old books. The statue came into the hands of a Christopher Smith in 1994, who lived in the small town of Arcadia Junction. He never displayed it and lived and died alone. He owned a gas station near railroad tracks that allowed Corgrim Carl to absorb trace MTBE from the air and influence Smith to gain pleasure when looking at the statue and dismay when not looking at it, and also to use gasoline when cleaning it. By 1999, the entity sensed a train carrying a large amount of MTBE, so influenced Smith to put his truck on the tracks as it approached. It crashed, killing him and 3 of the train workers. The tanks ruptured, flooding the basement with MTBE, which allowed Corgrim Carl to remain conscious for decades. Unfortunately for this entity, but perhaps fortunately for everyone else, the spill of toxic trichloroethylene, or TCS, caused the region to empty of humans for many years. In frustration, the entity could only manipulate animals like stray dogs, squirrels and rats, but they couldn't restore it to mobility, though it did influence predators to feed near it, which gave small amounts of blood. Ultimately, it needs humans. We have a timeline from 1994 when Christopher Smith acquired the dormant entity, right the way to today and up to 8 days in the future, which I will talk about in turn. The next section is the pawn. A stroke of luck came for Corgan and Carl when a grad student from the University of Missouri, Kansas, Stacey Galsworthy, examined the spore puff that she had found, initially mislabeling it as a different type of fungus. While examining it, the spore burst, filling her eyes, allowing the entity to see through hers and manipulate her. It led her to where it was, which took 4 years, using a sense of chemical euphoria, which Stacey believed to be proof the harmonic bliss was working for her. Though Dom was resistant, Estelle was more open to her revelations and moved to their farm rent-free. Galworthy dropped out of education and they devoted themselves to harmonic bliss and Stacey's melodious intuitions. Upon hearing the name of Arcadia Junction, she was filled with bliss and discussed it with her husband, who suggested going there. They took Estelle and Meredith and went there, finding Corgan and Carl. It used the limited motion at a stockpile to kill Stacey and James Galworthy and grabbed Meredith to use as long-term nourishment. It worked out that Stacey deferred to Knox and understood her to be useful. It overcame Estelle by doping her brain and carved the Glyph of Harmony on a concrete plate in the foundations, subsequently waking her up and warping her memory to believe that the Galsworthys had achieved something mystical, bringing her under its control. She left with her memories altered, some of the spores, the glyph, and the desire to gain more followers. The entity moved itself to another house and dug into the basement, arranging the remains of the Galsworthys around it and attaching Meredith to itself, keeping her alive and diluting her blood to keep itself awake. The scenario is described as working best as a 2-session operation, with part 1 covering the infiltration and the second being the resolution. Session 1 starts with the agents going undercover at the Galsworthy farm to gain the trust of the religious people there. There are only 2 suspicious elements at play at this point, the glyph on the pamphlet and the missing Galsworthys. It makes the point that all they are required to do is to investigate, and that there's a lot to do, and not all of it is relevant, which is by design, in order to get the players to sort the wheat from the chaff and to find out what is really happening, suggesting dividing the information into core and auxiliary clues. The core clues are needed in order to find out about Arcadia Junction and find the abomination that resides there. There are 3 clues that point in that direction: Estelle's spores, her unnatural glyph, and discovering that at least one of these is found at Arcadia Junction. When this information is discovered, that opens the place to be explored in the second session. The auxiliary clues aren't required, but add interesting background as to what is happening, as well as possibly helping them survive the final confrontation. The first is the Narcotic Entities report, which suggests blood is needed for the statue-like things to become mobile. This report can be accessed by asking Delta Green about the Aventurus glyph. This references the second clue, Seneca Whirlwind. This particular report implies that something that can't be harmed using common means is at play, so increases the chances of being granted explosives if they are requested, should they cite it. The third clue is Stacey Galsworthy's research, which can reveal the strangeness surrounding the spores as well as where they're found. We have a box out about splitting the party where it suggests cutting away to the other groups instantly at moments of surprise, giving some examples on how to do this to not only make them sweat a bit longer, but also give them time to think about a way of getting out of trouble. Session 2 is described as being much more straightforward once they get to Arcadia Junction, though pacing this could be an issue and previous events should be summarised so that everybody understands what they are there for. The next part is called Going to the Farm. Here it makes the assumption that 1 or 2 of the agents are willing to go undercover alongside Don Hocking. As they get near to the farm, Hocking starts doubting whether he can hold it together and becomes sweaty and anxious, though this can be calmed by an agent with 50% Inhuman who can make a persuade roll, or an agent can try psychology at plus 20%. If this succeeds, Hocking gets a grip and won't blow their cover. The farm itself is a 45-minute drive from Kansas City and is 40 acres of fields, trees and a creek. It is described as a hobby farm where organic vegetables are tended and they have chickens and 2 goats. The farmhouse is 2-storey with 6 bedrooms and a 50s vintage that is nicely maintained. It is described as being an uneasy mix of country decor and new age. The initial meeting they have with Estelle is accompanied by Don Hocking, and there are a few other new joiners arriving at the same time. She will greet everyone at the door and is described as pale and energetic with protruding eyes, who seems to shake hands for slightly too long. Electrical devices are turned in at the door and put in a basket. Estelle is described as not being crazy. Well, that was until she became enamoured by Corgan and Carl. We have a box out called Player's Cool Air Heals, where it describes what the people who are not undercover can do to help. This includes research, connecting the dots, and even support roles should the agents go undercover with earpieces. We have a full page map of the Galsworthy farm, and this is followed by a box out called Going In Wired. Hocking will advise not going in wired, as there's a lot of touching and hugging involved in Harmonic Bliss, and the FBI were involved with them not so long ago, so they are alert. If they do wear one, the handler rolls a secret disguise check and a sig-in for the agent. If the disguise fails, the wire is noticed at the farm. If the sig-in roll fails, the signal is too muffled. If both succeed, all is good. Anyone who has some competence in medicine who observes Estelle can notice that she has slightly protruding eyes, smooth skin, insomnia, hyperactivity, and heat intolerance that indicates a mild hypothyroid condition. However, she will shrug it off if it's pointed out, saying she has no need for traditional medicine. Depending on how the handler wants to play her, she could be trippy and vague, talking about spirit guardians or energy intelligences. She's also described as a cryptic drama queen, always hints that she knows more than she can currently reveal. One other thing about Estelle to consider is that she is absolutely genuine and truly believes that she can make humanity better, and no evidence can persuade her otherwise, as she has experienced the sublime. The initial meeting will determine whether the agents make a good impression or blow their cover, as well as who they meet and what they do. Estelle will ask the current members of Harmonic Bliss to welcome their visitors, as well as determining if they are ready. No one force the issue if they say they're not, but will make them unlikely candidates for the commune. Additionally, Hocking's behaviour could be an issue for them. Should they agree, they will need to have a reading using the Omega Reader, a wooden frame embedded with crystals that has a glass screen, a speaker, and various knobs and wires that connect to electrodes. The device runs on batteries. Estelle will connect them to the hands and temples of the agents and ask them to close their eyes while she switches it on in silence. The screen is an oscilloscope that will cause the speakers to squeal. To it, Estelle will then say that the Omega Reader has found disharmonies in their spirit. She will ask them some leading questions about how happy they are in life or whether they feel disconnected or alone. These questions are intended to get them to vocalise how they feel so she can tell them of the benefits of Harmonic Bliss. The Omega Reader itself, if examined by anybody with skills in medicine or science, can be found to most likely be a unit that measures electrical conductivity of skin. After this, it goes into the various conversations the agents can have with Estelle. Should they share how they feel with her, they can make a human roll to notice that she is eager to hear of their disharmony. If they really play it up, they can have an ongoing plus 20% to charisma and persuade rolls with Estelle, as she feels relaxed around them and invites them back, not suspecting that they could be infiltrators. If they look around the house, she will not be suspicious. If any of the agents have any musical talent, this will be appreciated, and even those who at least try are appreciated. She takes those unwilling to participate as showing tremendous personal disharmony and offers to help them. She will say absolutely nothing about Corger and Carl. She is essentially so blown away by her experience with it she can't vocalise how it felt, as well as her wanting to feel special as its high priestess. One of the followers, Debbie Amstutz, is currently upstairs taking a ritual hot bath and harmonising. She'll finish up as they are completing their readings and come down. She came to Harmonic Bliss about a year ago, and Estelle has been helping her since, causing her to put her income and savings at the disposal of Estelle. She will have an Omega reading, which will show her as much calmer than the agents. To it, Estelle will congratulate her on her progress. Debbie will then thank Estelle, telling the group that Harmonic Bliss saved her life. The first attunement session involves a wordless, semi-musical freeform massage, which has a lot of hugging but nothing sexual. This is in fact frowned upon. After this, they are isolated and have pre-verbal meditation, which involves quiet muttering and humming in order to silence the conscience. The agents are accompanied by Don Hocking or Debbie Amstutz to guide them, after which they are left alone and everyone is distracted, so it creates a good opportunity to look around the farm. Following this, we have a current list of the Blissites. There are 11 at the meeting, of which 7 live there. We have the aforementioned Debbie Amstutz, Stan Capra, a 62-year-old former metal worker and widower who commutes there, Ronald Fitz, who is notable for having an uncorrected cleft palate who doesn't talk much, Kiko Franks, a 43-year-old widow who is an insurance broker who commutes there, Brenda Keening, a 39-year-old who lives at the farm, Estelle, Elizabeth Mitchell, a recent divorcee who lives at the farm who is a tax accountant, Brandon Murphy, a 35-year-old who stays at the farm. Notably, he does nothing to stand out. There is Vivica Poseidon, aka Jessie Ann Lindstrom, a piano teacher who commutes there, Janet Ramirez, a 31-year-old who stays at the farm, and finally Beauregard Smith, a 31-year-old struggling to come to terms with the fact that he is gay, who does tech support and lives at the farm. After the meditation, the Blissites claim to feel a connection to the music of the universe. Any agent who does the meditation will experience a sense of the attunement the others feel, and will get a glimpse of an abandoned town, with those who are especially sensitive feeling the presence of something else that's powerful. After this meditation, there is a group discussion about their lives and how harmonic bliss helps. Following this, those who don't live there part with hugs and then leave, while the residents stay. If the agents try to stay at the farm, they need to pass a persuade or occult test on Estelle. If the test fails, she's suspicious, so lets them stay anyway, and they have a minus 20% to further persuade rolls with her. A fumble makes you think that they are police or reporters. This is followed by a section called Investigations. It discusses keeping the pacing of investigations tight, and to remind the agents that the glyph on the pamphlet is suspicious, the Galworthy's vanishing is troubling, and their job is to gather evidence and put together theories based on this. The agents can plant bugs around the house with varying results depending on success, failure, critical or fumble, though not a lot can actually be garnered from this. Should they search the house, there are a number of things that they can find. There are various unrelated occult trappings that look touristy. Estelle has a library of books on New Age spirituality, with some having plates that say Armstrong Knox. Some of them are about basic musical theory. If the bathroom is searched, a pill bottle with a fine brown dust can be discovered. These are the spores. In the attic there are numerous relics of the Galworthys, however, underneath an insulation stack is the Glyph of Harmony. This is carved onto a piece of thick concrete and is fairly heavy. It looks like it was gouged out by a sharp implement. Estelle requires the help of Brandon Murphy to move it effectively. There's no effect from looking at it. If it's smashed, a point of SAN is gained, but Corger and Carl will know this and hit Estelle with a spasm of fear and misery, guiding her toward whatever the glyph is. She will call the police on anybody found nearby, and the mission is blown. If she's asked about the glyph, she will smile knowingly and say, "That is the symbol of harmony. It means good things. You'll see soon. It came to me as a gift from the universal song." We have a map of the farmhouse with no scale on it, and then it goes on to analysing the spores. Anybody with a modicum of skill in pharmacy or biology can identify that they are fungal spores of unknown origin and are dry and stale, though probably fluffy enough to be airborne when fresh. They are microscopically small and durable, though a mask would probably block them. They have incredibly complex structures and if cultivated will form sensory arrays, and Corger and Carl will become aware of the agents but unconcerned. If a lab rat is injected with the spores, the sensory array forms around its eyes with a tiny digesting cyst that seems to be parasiting the rat's blood, and if dissected it has hormone creation capacities that can form estrogen, oxytocin and epinephrine. Those skilled in botany or biology with over 50% take a small SAN hit due to this. Should they turn their findings over to Odette and up the Delta Green chain, they will receive a copy of the Narcotic Entity Report. If the group doesn't have any science skills, Odette or Francisco can pass them over to a friendly in Omaha called Dr. Vanessa Che. She can conduct all of the experiments listed, offering the advice that they should mask up. If the agents decide to sneak onto the farm, they'll find it difficult due to the amount of people living there. There are usually at least 5 people present at any given time. On the day they'll be spotted and confronted by a blissite who will ask if they need help. At night it depends on the range of their stealth roll. If they search Estelle's room while she's sleeping, they need a critical or she will wake up screaming. Long-distance surveillance can also be performed, but the only thing that can be determined is that Odette is excited about something. After the glyph meeting, the words Arcadia Junction can be heard. More on that in a bit. Should Estelle's phone be bugged, it will be discovered to be a cheap low-quality burner that she generally avoids using. The only thing discovered this way is that she occasionally calls to reassure parents and friends that everything is fine. Nothing suspicious is talked about. If the Galworthys are looked into, they can discover that the local police did a lot of what is normal, looking into their credit cards and the like. And it can be discovered that they had been talking about taking a trip and are already regarded as flaky by the people that knew them. No paper trail exists beyond the purchase at a gas station. Estelle claims she dropped them off in Kansas City opposite their favourite bakery and then drove their car back to the farm. The police searched the farm and car and found nothing. If agents look into their finances, they can see that no money has left or entered their account since they vanished and no withdrawals before the trip either, which is in itself of interest. The police made the mistake of not checking the security footage from the bank across the street, and if requested, their car does not make an appearance when Estelle says it does. Any agent who spends an entire day searching traffic and gas station camera footage can get a partial plate reading of a green Avalon heading away from Kansas City. Should the University of Missouri's biology department be questioned, quite a bit can be learned. More on that in a bit. If the agents ask Delta Green about the glyph on the pamphlet, a few days will pass, and the agent who asked will have a meeting arranged where their case officer will ask them why they need this information, as it's not given out to simply satisfy curiosity and that it could be hazardous. If the agent expresses that they are willing to take that risk, a courier will arrive with a Narcotic Entities Report. If the agents investigate it independently, they can make an occult roll to determine that it's a symbol sometimes called a virtuous. A successful roll will also determine that they can find information on the dark web from someone called Dr. Deep, who will charge $200 for an email consultation. The names and backgrounds of the Blissites can easily be found out, though it can be determined that they are just sad people who have no important secrets. They may even decide to set up a hidden observation post with a sniper rifle in case things get out of hand, and anyone doing this will see where Estelle gets the Glyph of Harmony from. The whole guy in the chair approach, one where an agent can essentially look up things and talk an agent in situation through something live, can be done, but it does stress keeping the agents as paranoid as possible. The next section is called Possible Escalations. If the agents blow their cover by being found to be wearing a wire or planting a bug, then Estelle has a strange negative physical reaction where she does uncontrolled rhythmic movements. She'll berate the agents, telling them that they should show more respect for the harmonies of the universe and they are just sanding the gears, though can't explain what it means. A really good story, or a persuade at -20%, can convince Estelle to stop them throwing them out, and if they don't go, she will call the county sheriff's office and a TV news show, blowing the agent's cover as entering under false pretense. The sheriff won't press charges against the FBI agents investigating a suspected kidnapper's house, though the media may possibly pile on. Estelle is upset about the electronics and remains suspicious. They can no longer live at the farm. If the agents try to abduct Estelle, the initial problem is the amount of witnesses, of which some have mobile phones and the farm has a landline. If they succeed and she is interrogated, she easily breaks down and tells the agents that the Glyph of Harmony caused the trouble, saying that Stacey Galworthy found it somewhere and it influences everyone, offering to give it to them if they set her free. She'll tell them that it is at the farm but hidden and has strange properties that prevent people from finding it. She will tell them that the Galworthys are at a new home in an old abandoned house on the other side of the state and can take them there if they let her go. If pushed, she will give them directions to where Corcoran Carl is housed, but doesn't tell them about it. A human to 50% plus will determine that Estelle thinks she's telling the truth. Those who pass a roll and have that percentage of humans will come to understand that she doesn't know the difference between fantasy and reality. Should they go back down to the farm with her to get the glyph, she will immediately say, "Please put the weapons down," which the glyph has influence over. If the Blissites also join in asking them, it will wear down the agent quickly, though the trance it induces will wear off before law enforcement arrives and they'll be cuffed. Estelle will then show them the glyph and then tell them to eat some spores. Of course, Don could start getting nervous and tell him that he wants to speak to Jackson. He wants to renegotiate the deal, citing the fact that he can't sleep and doesn't think he can do it. He will ask to either be withdrawn or immune to prosecution, though he isn't sure what crime he could have committed or even enter the witness protection program, even though it's highly unlikely the Harmonic Bliss will pursue vengeance against him. Of course, due to the nature of the operation, the last two are difficult to implement. He can be persuaded gently or more severely, though this could make his further actions more unpredictable. The next section is called Life at the Farm. Estelle is hyperactive, constantly pacing and humming to herself, becoming excited about something she won't talk about. She will try to have a private talk with one of the agents, coming across as someone who genuinely believes she has something that can improve countless lives. The agents should simply be asked if they like Estelle, yes or no. No has zero effect. Yes means they get plus 20% to persuade with her, but if they witness her death or she chooses Corcoran Carl over them, they lose a point of san. The other residents of the farm are transients, hipsters and true believers. Most of them will follow Estelle, thriving on the attention and leadership she gives them. Brandon will step in as a leader when Estelle is distracted. He sees them as a gang of gullible, weak people for him to take advantage of. He's given her access to a savings account that he can stand to lose and is fooling her, planning on taking control of the group in a few months, though he knows nothing about Arcadia Junction. He's good at spotting needy, insecure people. Those agents with a high power or who act confidently raise his suspicions, suspecting they could be like him and never thinking that they could be the law. He will work at turning knocks against them. He's currently grooming Debbie Amstutz, which she has not yet noticed. At the second meeting, Estelle gets Murphy and another Blissite to bring the Glyph of Harmony downstairs. It's wrapped in blankets and carried carefully into the dining room. Estelle will look flushed with joy due to Corcoran Carl flooding her system with chemicals, and she will tell everyone that she has something special to show them, saying that the universe has heard their song and sung back and reveal a symbol of harmony, pulling the cloth off it. If anybody gazes at it, they become a target, and they can see that it is the glyph from the pamphlet and they want to stare at it. If they pointedly look away, the group will notice, making Estelle suspicious and dissolving all goodwill they may have built up, and she will demand they leave. If they casually avoid it, they must make a power ×5 or be affected. A pass means that they pull this off. The Glyph of Harmony itself can only be created by something in the ilk of Corcoran Carl, which can use it to control humans when it is aware they are looking at it. Those infected by spores make Corcoran Carl aware of those in its presence. Once affected, humans go into a semi-trance state for an hour and are suggestible to the extreme. This resolves in games to two effects. Number one, They count as being adapted to violence and helplessness, which seems like a dream. And number 2, if someone tells them to do something that seems reasonable, they will do it. Halfway reasonable suggestions must be carried out unless the target spends a point of willpower. Long-held beliefs and the like can't be changed. Once everyone has been affected by the glyph, Estelle will take out a silver container the size of a matchbox. This is full of Quogre and Carl's spores, and those in a suggestible state will form a line and take turns snorting them, though they can try and resist this. Agents can attempt a stealth roll to pretend to snort them, or to persuade can convince Estelle that they can't if the reason is good. Should an agent refuse, Don Hocking will too. If they do snort them, they develop the Quogre and Carl infection, becoming a servant to this abomination. The strange dream state that everyone is in could allow the agents to question the group. If asked about the powder, Estelle will say that it is from the body of a higher being that has come to Earth to harmonise us all, telling them that it came from the Dragonstone, Quogre and Carl. If asked about the symbol, Estelle won't know what it means but says it's beautiful, like music made visible, and that Quogre and Carl gave it as a gift. If asked where it is, she will say that Quogre and Carl is at Arcadia Junction and that they should go there on a pilgrimage tomorrow, also saying that the Galworthies are there if asked. Ingesting the spores is a bad idea. Within the first 24 hours, the sinuses and throat become sore as the spores grab onto the tissue to create a proto-organ to tunnel through to the lungs and lymph system until they get to the eyes and fat deposits. These quickly become drug producers directly into the bloodstream and can create bursts of anxiety, euphoria and the like, essentially any reaction caused by the hormones and blood chemistry. This is under the control of Quogre and Carl and can even make them feel terrified or even have inappropriate feelings that cause sand loss. After around a day, the spores get to the eyes and create a sensory array, allowing Quogre and Carl to see and hear everything that happens to that person. They can see even if the person who has them is blind or deaf. The sensory arrays can be spotted with those skilled in biology or medicine, and Quogre and Carl can poison anybody who displeases it by creating toxins that can damage the host. The infection can be cured by medicines that treat fungal infections. Quogre and Carl does not take kindly to humans tampering with its spores, and the second time on Earth that somebody is treated for the spores, it creates a host of symptoms such as vomiting and fever that give those infected a -20% to everything while in this state. This lasts for d4 plus 2 days, though still curable using the previous methods. If over a dozen people are treated, Quogre and Carl escalates the attacks, though again it's still curable after d6 plus 2 days, though they now have to contend with a bad cough, rash and immune system damage, losing a point of con permanently and being unable to reproduce. The fungus is gone when it's dead. The spores and glyph have certain synergies when used together, which are illustrated in this Venn diagram here. The main thing is ongoing influence. This reduces the victim's weakest bond by 1. Secondly, Quogre and Carl's animal minions at Arcadia Junction will ignore them, being aware that they are one of their own. Finally, if they act violently against Quogre and Carl or its minions, they take a sand hit from the unnatural. An interesting part of this is Don Hocking's reaction. When he sees the glyph, he will ingest the spores, becoming a dangerous risk to the entire operation. He won't reveal what's going on his own, however he will spill the truth if Knox or Brandon Murphy press him. The effects of the glyph wear off while the Blissites are humming to themselves, and as they gather to talk about their personal issues, Estelle will announce that they will sing with the ageless wisdom, giving those who ingested the spores a burst of ecstasy. She will set up a meeting for 2 days' time, insisting that everyone should stay at the farm. Those who want to leave arouse her suspicion, whatever the reason. There are a couple of things the agents can try. Firstly, they can ask where the glyph came from, as well as the spores. She will tell them with a persuade roll that it is Arcadia Junction. If they ask about the Galworthies, they need to be tactful. Whatever the tactic, she will tell them that they moved on to a greater state of harmony just as her father did, saying that they are waiting for them, and when they find them, they will find harmony. Those who make a human while she says this will notice a tiny flicker of doubt across her face. If the agents break the glyph, which requires a heavy hammer or crowbar, this gives a point of sand to the agent who does so. Quogre and Carl becomes immediately aware and sends misery and fear to all that are infested. Estelle will stop what she's doing and go toward the glyph. The other Blissites can also be interrogated, though none of them genuinely know anything, though they could speculate wildly. Agents who are not undercover may not truly understand what has just happened. Those who see it may overreact, draw guns and start arresting people, though proving any crimes have been committed may be difficult. Whatever happens, Estelle will tell them nothing due to Quogre and Carl, filling her with hormones that put her in a hyper-serene state. Should they arrest everyone, take the spores and smash the glyph, it becomes complicated. No crime has been committed, and if sent to jail they'll be out in a week, and Estelle will take them to Arcadia Junction, though she can be followed. If they arrest everyone on the farm and frame them, a law and stealth roll will be needed in order to know what to frame them for and to plant evidence. A failure will arouse suspicion, with the agent with the worst persuade needing to make a roll to keep stories straight. It could end up backfiring on them massively. Estelle could eventually open up about Arcadia Junction and Quogre and Carl, though this requires a number of persuade rolls. If sent to prison, she tells some of the women there about the treasures at Arcadia Junction. A complete massacre of everyone there is actually a viable fix. The farm's in the middle of nowhere and screams and gunshots won't be heard. It can be staged as a mass suicide, though the Galworthies won't be found. Cogre and Carl will be stalled for some time. To do this, they need to kill everyone, and everyone there will just run. It has the potential to blow up in their faces and hitting their san. It's recommended that Estelle has some dying words about Cogre and Carl, possibly pointing towards Arcadia Junction. Stealing the glyph is also an option, however to get to the bottom of the disappearance, they should stay hidden and get to Arcadia Junction. Next we go into researching Arcadia Junction. We have a basic map of the area with the Arcadia Junction kind of strangely stuck in the top corner, and then we go into the research itself. An internet search will find the EPA pollution report, a handout later on in the scenario. Further digging can discover the failed clean-up and the denial of it being potentially cleaned up in the future. It's low on the list of priorities. Those with the right skills can discover the environmental damage to the area, as well as turning up Stacey Galworthy's name. 4 years ago, she was one of a number of students who collected samples from Arcadia Junction. If an agent can get access to the University of Missouri Kansas City's Biological Science Lab, they can possibly get a grad student to assist them, maybe even getting Stacey's work notes from that period. She was doing research on the long-term impact of the TCE contamination of soil and groundwater, taking a few dozen samples, several of which are still in storage. If these are investigated, they can find one labelled Volvariella bombacina and how it burst while she was examining it. Though peculiar, it was put aside as they are non-toxic. The agents can view photos of the samples, and those with the right skills can see this fungus is mislabelled. Nobody in the department can identify the taxonomy from that photo. Stacey is remembered as being a bit old, forgetful and cavalier about safety, and nobody was surprised when she quit and abandoned her doctorate, though additionally nobody here is aware that she has vanished. Should the agents visit the UKMC before they know about Arcadia Junction? One of the professors there, Dr. Glenda Akista, mentions that she was involved in a cataloguing project, leaving it half done, and can pull out the sample photo of the fungus, saying that Stacey botched the identification, though she doesn't know what it is. The agents can ask for the actual specimen, though the professor will say that it should have been destroyed, and if asked, she can be the person who discovers the facts about what the spores do. If they make the right roles to look into Arcadia Junction, they can find out about Chris Smith. A white Aryan resistance group are convinced that Smith was a Russian sleeper agent that was accidentally activated. This is a red herring. You can be involved in further investigations to extend the campaign though if you wish. Arcadia Junction itself is 600 kilometres west of the Galworthy farm, around a 6-hour drive. They will find it is a ghost town surrounded by flat fields and all buildings abandoned and some blackened from the fire. Cell coverage is spotty at best. Smith's house, the old site where Cogre and Carl was hiding, can be found here after a short search. Examination will show that something heavy has been moved around in the basement and part of the concrete has been broken by heavy blows. If anyone searches it and passes an archaeology or forensics roll, they can find a human jawbone in the corner. If sent to a lab, it can be discovered in a week's time to belong to James Galsworthy. We have a box out called Flying West. This covers the instance where the agents may want to get ahead of the Blissites and the logistics involved in requesting a flight, as well as how to ensure that they don't get there first. Walking around the town will, with a good survival score, show that there are almost no birds and decay induced by vermin is minimal, yet there are dog prints around that are strangely orderly. Those with a high percentage in survival shows that a lot of the wildlife here is behaving like a herd rather than specific species. If the wildlife is observed, it can be seen to be acting in a strange manner, almost cunning and without vocalization. Dogs can be seen moving in exact unison and not barking. Animals here can be caught and taken to the lab for study, where it can be discovered that there are infections in their bloodstream, particularly the eyes that have articulated structures. The soil and water, if tested, can turn up a fungus around the size of a golf ball that can be determined as being eaten by the dogs. The next section is called Et in Arcadia Ego, or And in Arcadia I Am. At the Galsworthy farm, 2 days are spent getting everything ready for the trip using a cargo trailer that Brandon Murphy hooks up to James Galworthy's pickup truck. The next session the group has involves the Glyph of Harmony again, and Estelle will tell the group that she found an idol of incalculable age that has unlocked a higher state of consciousness within her, and that she is leaving for Arcadia Junction right now. She will tell them that she doesn't expect anybody to do anything they're uncomfortable with, though it does, in her eyes, speak of the sincerity of the person. Should an agent mention the problems with Arcadia Junction, her reaction will depend on how the handler has played her so far. Should she have been played as what it describes as a religious cheerleader, she will say the problem is exaggerated and claim a fake news situation, believing disinformation was spread around to keep people fearful and unenlightened. If she is a more mysterious figure, she will suggest disinformation and, ironically, a government conspiracy. However she is portrayed, she will hand-wave the pollution. If left to her own devices, 11 of the Blissites will go with her, apart from Don Hocking, who will only go if exposed to the Glyph and Spores. Should agents raise any objections, the 4 Blissites who are commuting will quietly leave, while everyone else goes with Estelle. If the agents tail her to Arcadia Junction, they won't be noticed. Should they try to dissuade her, they will fail. Corgan Carl will flood her with ecstasy whenever she tells someone about Arcadia Junction. She feels like it's a pilgrimage and wants to take harmonic bliss with her. If individual Blissites are talked to, they can be persuaded, but the roll is at -20%. Next is Corgan Carl unveiled. In the event that the agents didn't go to Arcadia Junction and discover Corgan Carl, a pack of feral dogs will be spotted watching them at the edge of town, prompting Don Hocking and Brandon Murphy to arm themselves. Estelle will give a speech to her followers filled with cultish buzzwords, and at this point the agents have 2 potential options. Follow her to what she calls the Temple of Bliss, or interfere at some point, maybe under the pretense of the quarantine zone, or even arresting everyone for trespassing. Should they go with Estelle, she will take them to a house that is a ruin. It's difficult to get into due to sharp edges sticking out, but should they get inside, they need to crawl into the ruins on all 4s. Estelle will pull a slab of siding away to reveal a subfloor. She will grin and slide down into it. It leads to a cave that has been crudely gouged out of the earth that is 3 metres high and 12 in diameter. In the centre, there are a few 3-metre-long segmented rope-like limbs that extend from the earth. Each is topped with a blood-red pad, and arranged around them are the desiccated bodies of lots of small animals. Meredith Galsworthy hangs on the end of one limb, apparently dead. When everyone arrives, her eyes open, glowing with unnatural energy. This is a small sandhit. Knox will gaze back in adoration. If allowed to, she will explain that Corgan Carl is alive, and that the chemicals spilled here awoke it. She heard its voice in her mind that told her its name. She will go on to say that the Galworthys had joined Corgan Carl, but Meredith was a special case, having become one with the god, keeping her alive and using her blood to stay awake. The other limbs will at this point start stretching toward the group. Estelle will grab onto one of the limbs and start pulling spores out of the grooves, stuffing them into her mouth, her body flooded with ecstasy by the being. Estelle wants the group to provide enough blood to Corgan Carl to allow it to become mobile. If it does so, it casts Meredith's body aside and forces its way onto the truck so that its servants can find new blood for it. If any small amount of blood is spilled on it, Corgan Carl can become mobile and take actions. If a large amount is spilled, it can move for D4+1 turns. When blood has been shed, it summons the Carpet of Vermin, this is detailed later, and the pack of possessed dogs who will go straight to the cave and attack anyone not infected with the spores and take blood to Corgan Carl until it becomes mobile. We have a section called Gunplay in the Lair. Here it goes into a set of special rules for firearms due to the crowded nature of the basement, and then we move on to the options that the agents have. Firstly, they can kill Meredith. If they do so, the monster's limbs go rigid and it stays that way until more blood is spilled. The second is to somehow stop Estelle from ingesting more spores. The only way to do this is to take her down using unarmed combat, though all of the Blissites except Don Hocking will take her side, though I imagine that shooting her in the head, while effective, will only help Corgan Carl. The third option is pulling out badges, guns and calling for backup. This causes a variety of actions, to people running for it or freezing on the spot. Brandon Murphy, on the other hand, will pull his gun and then try to put as many of the Blissites between him and the agents as possible, pistol whipping Elizabeth Mitchell if not stopped. This causes a spray of blood that lands on Corgan Carl or his Carpet of Vermin. He will try to shoot anybody who grapples with him. Don Hocking will shoot back if present. The fourth option is to wait and watch. Estelle will embrace the statue and ride in delight, at which point Don Hocking will turn to the agents and ask if they're going to do something. Some Blissites will start harvesting the spores, with Brandon Murphy shoving people forward. If they still don't act, Hocking will pull his gun and scream at the statue, opening fire on it, Estelle and Murphy. The bloodshed could awaken Corgan Carl. If Hocking is not there, another Blissite will take his place. Anybody who doesn't enter the basement who is not infected by the spores will be swarmed by the blanket of vermin and feral dogs. If they take them down and go in, they'll find the Blissites biting themselves to offer blood to the statue. The fifth option is to eat some spores, at which point the handler should take away the player's character sheet, look the player in the eye and say, "You've never been so happy." The sixth and probably least likely outcome is to do everything right. This entails stopping Estelle from eating the spores and taking Murphy down without bloodshed. In this instance, everyone can get out of there and taken into custody. The statue can be seized and the bodies of the Galworthys can be found. It then discusses methods of stopping Estelle early. Though it looks like a good, perhaps obvious idea, it's not that simple. Corgan Carl knows she is on her way and wants her to come. If they opt for a hard takedown, guns drawn, screaming to get on the floor, Brandon Murphy will attempt to run for it. If Murphy's caught, he surrenders. Estelle will enter the cave with the pack of feral dogs in tow. They will help her give blood to Corgan Carl. Should Estelle be physically caught, a Carpet of Vermin will sweep in and try and free her, followed by the dogs. If the agents manage to stop both, then they can capture Corgan Carl without a further drop of blood being spilled. If Estelle manages to get to the cave, but all of the bliss sites are kept away, Estelle's blood will awaken Corga and Carl and will allow it to be mobile for hours. They're only capable of moving at 6 miles per hour. The nearest settlement of any size is 40 kilometres away. Should the agents have weapons, they could attempt to bring it down. There's the soft approach, that being wearing biohazard suits and warning the bliss sites that the site is quarantined. Estelle will play dumb, lead the people away from town, and then tell her followers that they will go in at night, assuring them that the pollution is exaggerated. The other option is for the agents to go to Arcadia Junction early and possibly find the Lair. Carl will be paralysed, though able to blast them with spores, which they may inhale. It will summon a carpet of vermin and feral dogs to make them bleed. We then have a variety of SAN awards for the varying degrees of success, and after this we have some interesting ongoing investigations. It talks about expanding upon Christopher Smith and how he came into possession of the idol. There is the Seneca Whirlwind operation and the whole situation surrounding that. It ties Majestic into proceedings and gives some good food for thought. There are also 2 campaign ideas centred around the premise that Corga and Carl, should the entity be released, gets away and starts building a power base. After this we have various characters of the piece. Special Agent Odette Jackson, Francisco Sellers, Don Hocking, Estelle Knox, 2 different versions of members of Harmonic Bliss, Brandon Murphy, the possessed feral dogs, and the carpet of vermin. Last in this section there is the antagonist of the piece, Corga and Carl itself, a god of stone and blood. Finally there are the various handouts available for the players to find. For me, Wormwood Arena ultimately fails to live up to its potential. There are a number of factors that I feel are lacking throughout the scenario. Firstly is that the whole thing feels rushed. It seems like no sooner are the agents there, and before they can fully embrace the experience of Harmonic Bliss, than they're being entrapped by the Glyph of Harmony and heading off to Arcadia Junction. I feel a more drawn-out process would have raised the levels of cultishness and allowed the agents to delve into the bliss sites and to perhaps even be drawn into the cult themselves. Secondly is the fact that, in what we would call the average party of 5 players, 3 of them are potentially sidelined, while just 1 or 2 go in and infiltrate it. I don't think that's very conducive to a game that includes input from everyone. Yes, it builds tension, but there are so many escape routes presented, the likes of Don Hocking and Estelle's actual trustworthiness, that at the Galsworthy farm it never feels that they're under any serious threat. The idea of bringing in a group of newly recruited agents to have this as their first real operation is inherently a good one. However, you could realistically end up with an astronaut, a doctor and a soldier crowbarred together, or even possibly an entire group of survivors of the other scenarios in Control Group that already know each other at the exclusion of any semblance of party balance. How a group of soldiers would react when compared to a group of doctors will be wildly different. Corga and Carl itself seems like a strangely ineffectual entity. Due to its lack of mobility, it is nowhere near as scary as it could potentially be. It is clever how it manipulates the animals of Earth, but it's so easily frozen out and useless if the right path is taken that it feels like less of a big bad and more of a background nuisance. The characters of Estelle Knox and Don Hocking are really well realised, and I feel like they're almost wasted on this scenario. And Arcadia Junction itself doesn't have enough in the way of a threat to trouble experienced players, even when playing new agents. Additionally, a lot of the clues are so buried and obscure that I imagine a lot of players would have difficulty even getting close to them. Wormwood Arena is a rare miss for Delta Green, a game where the authors get it so right so often, and I feel it makes Control Group end with a pop rather than an explosion. I give it a 5.5 out of 10. Okay, so now I've looked at the entirety of Control Group, and I would like to discuss my experience as a handler running it for my own group. My own players felt that Black Sat was more like a rollercoaster ride that they experienced, rather than something that they were in any way in control of. It all seemed a bit tame and lacking in certain areas, while overly concentrating on backstory at the expense of describing things that actually needed to be in the scenario, like the training facilities that they are meant to be putting the non-astronauts through. Night Visions was my favourite scenario of the set, with its really evocative descriptions and atmosphere, whereas my players said that their favourite was Sick Again, as they felt like they had much more agency and loved the big reveal of the tattoo, as well as working out what the scribbled equations meant, and ultimately cracked what to do about the virus. They found it immensely satisfying. When I discussed with them recently about what they thought of Wormwood Arena, my entire group had real difficulty remembering much about it that stuck out, which is either a damning testament to my skills as a handler or something inherently forgettable about this scenario. All in all, I think that though Control Group is a great idea, it falls over in its execution. Any of these scenarios could be run as a singular entity and be better for it, and the idea of playing the first 3 and then using the survivors to do the final one, while good in theory, didn't really work for me in practice. My recommendation would be to pick up the book as a small collection of scenarios rather than to play it as is, because I believe it offers much more in the way of enjoyment if that path is taken than if used as it was truly intended. I'd give it a 7 out of 10. If you enjoyed this review, please make sure to hit the thumbs up, subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos. Also, if you're interested in buying this product, I've put some links below. Lastly, if you like what I produce here, then maybe think about supporting me on Patreon or even becoming a member of my YouTube channel. Bud out.